ADA 30 Idaho. Interview Series. Ashley Olson, interviewed by Erik Kingston.
Okay, well, let's get started. This is Erik Kingston. I'm with the Idaho Access Project, among other things. And it's my pleasure today to interview Ashley Olson, the founder of WheelchairTravelingcom. And I guess, Ashley, whenever people ask me what you do, I say, well, she's a travel writer, I think, that uses a wheelchair and goes on adventures all over the world. So tell me a little bit about, kind of your experience and, what brought you to this point.
I would say a more accurate description of kind of what I do, I guess, would be a travel consultant.
Okay.
In the most general sense, consultant, researcher, educator, in terms of this whole community that we have. And so I have a spinal cord injury. I was paralyzed in a car accident, and after I got out of college, I was working full time, and on the side, I was building a website called WheelchairTravelingcom. I pretty much just wanted to create a roadmap that I could follow and others could follow when they wanted to go traveling, local, domestically, or internationally. Of course, I originally I started locally and more domestically, but the whole dream, yes, was to go internationally, but I knew I had to step small, take little small steps. And so I really wanted to build a platform also that would showcase everybody's interests and ways of getting things accomplished, and what they're willing to put up with, what they're not willing to put up with, just to give like a vast array of different activities and things that can be done, for people who have limited mobility or use a wheelchair. One of my main reasons for starting the website is also because of my love of nature. I grew up camping and hiking, and my dad was a park ranger, and my mom was also a landscape architect. So they definitely instilled in their children, this love of nature and appreciation of nature and care for nature and Mother Earth, and, of course, respect for it as well. And so we did a lot of hiking and camping when I was younger. And so I love the outdoors. I absolutely, just thrive in the outdoors. Have so many stories about that when I was a kid. And after I became paralyzed, I still love the outdoors. I want to be outside in the sunshine, and all the beautiful smells. And, I just kept thinking, okay, so what can I do now? Like, how can I make this work? And I wasn't really finding the information that I really wanted online, or would be extremely hard to find if at all existed. And when I would go to ranger stations or visitors bureaus or things of that nature, I might get partial information, inaccurate information, or sometimes no information at all, because they have liability issues, and they didn't want to give me information that could get me into trouble. And so again, I just wanted to create this roadmap that I could follow. And so this was the platform. I wanted to create it for a worldwide audience and to have any and everybody be able to share that information, because I know the world is such a big place, and I couldn't go to every single park, stay at every hotel and whatnot. So just wanted to create it open to the whole world. So a little more about wheelchair traveling. On the site, if you go to wheelchairtraveling.com, I wanted to create a platform where you could search for travel in many different ways. So let's say you just wanted to go, quote unquote backpacking, around the United States. Well, you can go to the site, maybe you're looking at certain states, and you could see, what's available in those states, whether it's hotels or activities. That would be an option. Or maybe you knew exactly where you wanted to go. You wanted to go to San Francisco, so you could go on the site and just literally type in San Francisco and have options pop up. Or maybe, you wanted to search by interests. I love adventure, or I love history,
Right.
going to museums and that kind of a thing. So I have sections, that just focuses on those activities as well. And that includes also places to rent, that are accessible. There's also information about tour companies online as well. So there's all these different tour companies around the world that have organized tours, that have been there, done that kind of thing. And, they know where the accessible bathrooms are, the best routes, and based on the interests and needs of the parties that they serve. And, can really do a great job for whatever the environment, is. So there's a lot of tour groups on the site, and then there's also a lot of products as well. So just to make travel and, mobility life, easier. So whether it's, shower chairs or different wheelchairs or, portable hand controls or, a plethora of different items, these can make travel so much better.
Right.
Sometimes it might be better to rent the equipment, depending on where you go and whatnot, which there is some information on my site as well. But again, it's a big world. I haven't been able to add every single rental company yet on my site, but I am trying. And there's a form also on the site too. It's open to people, volunteers, and people who need payment as well. If you want to do some research locally or internationally, and I have a ton of ideas in my head, I can come up work with you on some ideas too, if you wanted to contribute to the site, because the more the merrier, and we're just going to make the world accessible one way or the other.
Well, I notice, because I follow this site every once in a while, I see, I kind of check in on it once in a while, and sometimes I'll see something on your Instagram, account that makes me think, oh, I should check out that. But I like the way it's organized. I've got it up on my other screen, and like you said, you've got, several headings. You've got destinations, interests, accommodations, transportation, and then tips and tools. Great organization, I think. So, like you said, if somebody wants to just pick a destination like Asia or Europe or South America or something like that, that's where they can jump off. Or if they like, zip lining or, that kind of thing, or water sports, you've got a way to get into that too. So
yeah, definitely. Oh, and I just wanted to jump in real
yeah.
quick and also just add that, there's a good section on tips. Tips is something that, just shouldn't be overlooked. I just want to emphasize a little bit, that has a lot of information about flying, packing, has manual wheelchair travel tips, power wheelchair travel tips, about caregivers, just all these different conversation, pieces and information and facts, who to contact if your chair's damaged, kind of thing. Just again to further prepare you on on your travel experience. And of course, I have a lot of social media stuff, and now over 75 videos of places that I've traveled to, and a couple of videos with really good tips as well.
Well, and I think you mentioned earlier, you do invite people to submit their own, kind of travel logs about different experiences that they've had. And I kind of like that, where other people can contribute as, kind of an editorial piece from their trips. It's an amazing resource. I mean, you've created a real kind of portal to adventure, I guess, is one way to put it.
Definitely, just to get out there and, experience the world.
Yeah. So you've spent a lot of years in a wheelchair, and you've probably seen a lot of changes over time. Right now we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and I know that impacts a lot of people. But what does the ADA mean to you at this point in your life?
The ADA means to me, when I hear the ADA, I think independence, freedom, and independence. So I can go and operate within reasonable expectations, just like everybody else. I can go to work, I can, go to the grocery store, pump my gas, go to the movies, just all these little things, just like everybody else do, that there's a way for me to do it as well.
Excellent. So one of the things that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I think, is, the difference between inclusive recreation and what people used to refer to as accessible recreation. I like that. I like that distinction. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about and how that's used?
Yeah, the community, like for a while, accessibility and whatnot has definitely been the main focus and the word that has been used. I still feel it projects the most clear vision of kind of what we're after. But there is an additional word that is still, I feel like, really important to the movement, which is inclusion. So inclusion is is more about the activity, not the infrastructure, and accessibility is more about the infrastructure. Inclusion, includes everybody, and accessibility is more about people with mobility issues. So those are some some clear distinctions between those. Inclusion is more, it's simple, it's kind of like the common sense part of the brain, like the practical things on how to improve a situation. It's definitely more cost effective and instant. Whereas, the accessibility ADA guidelines, it takes time, it takes a lot of time. Finance, of course, more money because you have to hire more people, getting things approved and whatnot. What else? Sorry, it popped out of my head.
That's okay.
So, and then, so inclusion, accessibility, is definitely, I feel like in some ways they can be used in the same way, and they are just words, but I definitely understand, in terms of kind of what's going on in this world, that using inclusion in certain times can be a little bit more welcoming and opening to businesses and community leaders, just trying to get a bigger point across, a bigger message across.
Right.
Inclusion takes education, information, and cooperation, and if needed, adaption. So it's somebody comes to your store, you don't have a ramp. It's okay, but what can we do? I have this piece of plywood, instead of just saying, automatically no, turning the person away, or, this building is old, just trying to work with what you have, to open those doors.
Mm-hmm. And I like that. I like the idea of inclusiveness. Like you said, it is distinct, I think, from the concept of accessibility, because I think a lot of people think about physical modifications or physical access, and myself included, for a long time that sort of was my focus when I thought about accessibility, and it's been more recently that I start thinking about sensory impairment, and things that are more inclusive for folks that might be visually impaired or blind, or have be deaf or hard of hearing.
Yeah.
So how do they engage recreation, outdoor activities maybe a little differently?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
how do we create a more inclusive experience for them?
Yeah,
But,
especially with the outdoor stuff. It's
yeah.
That's where inclusion really plays a part with, because there's a lot of stuff in the great outdoors activities that can't really be made 100% ADA. Those boundaries get a little bit sticky. So inclusion is a really important word in order to include as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So rafting is not accessible, but with assistance, from the crew and whatnot, it's definitely possible, and it can be incredibly inclusive experience.
Yep, absolutely. It's a lot of fun. It's more fun with a bigger variety of people on board, I think.
Definitely.
So an example of that, I think, that I saw recently was here at Idaho River Sports in Boise. One of the folks we're working with on the ADA celebration, she's got a visual impairment, and she does diving, but she also was interested in paddleboarding, doing a stand-up paddleboard. And when she approached the folks at Idaho River Sports, their response was, "Yeah, let's make it work. Let's figure this out and do it." And I think that's kind of the attitude maybe that you've encountered with some folks, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you approach a vendor or a guide or outfitter or a tour company. How do you start that conversation with them? To say, here's what I want to do, and here's who I am, and this is how I'm hoping to experience this.
Well, I'm not shy.
No.
I'm very honest about my abilities and my needs, which I think is very important, for every single human being on the planet. You have to be your own advocate. You can't expect the person sitting across from you to understand your needs mentally, physically, etc. So you need to be clear. You need to, okay, yes, I'm paralyzed, I can walk, I can't walk, I can stand, I can't stand, I can move a little bit. I can go long distances, like I can, whatever it is, depending on what the activity is, what you're trying to do, just be reasonable, start the conversation, just, hi, like I'm Ashley, like I'm paralyzed. I'm looking to go ziplining. I've done it before. I'm not afraid of being manhandled. Which I think is kind of an important phrase because it, allows people to know, okay, yes, I can touch you, I'm not going to harm you or, cause damage to you or whatnot. Or if, let's say you do need to be lifted, there's a lot of different equipment out there that can help you. There's actually this I think it's called ADAPS, which is on my website. It's a portable sling that, is really easy, to slip under. It's great for hotels. It's great for airlines, just like emergency evacuation situations. I mean, it's so compact and portable, and super durable and can hold, a lot of weight. So it's just such a great tool. You can bring something with you.
Yeah.
If that is the case, and if that's more comfortable, like in general, like you can bring that with you and say, okay, this is what I have. Explain it to them, maybe provide a link or a picture or whatnot. And I feel like people who are willing, and once you give them a little bit of information, if it's possible, and if it's in their cards, yes, like, okay, yes, like people want to make something work. Occasionally you might get the people who are just a little bit fearful, and that's okay too, just move on to the next, there's other companies out there, who are willing to try. So, honor and promote and, reach out to them because they're out there.
So the ADAPS, the transfer sling, do you take one of those with you in some cases? Do you have one that you travel with?
I have not traveled with one. But as I get older and my shoulders get more and more problematic, I mean, it definitely could be, like one of these days for sure. But it's definitely something that I like to bring up at hotels because especially if I'm on the second floor, anything besides the first floor, I like to ask them, okay, what's your emergency evacuation, scenario? And, I'm impressed with some hotels that already have it in place, but some hotels kind of just have a wishy-washy plan, just like, oh no, somebody's going to come get you. But then it's nice to just open up that conversation in general because it really does educate, the hotel. And a lot of times hotels are chains. So it's not even just bringing the attention to one hotel. You really are bringing it to the awareness of more people. And if more people spoke up about it, the more, it would be followed and people would be more aware of it.
Right. And I know that that's something that's available if people go to the tools section of your website.
Yes.
That's where I found that. So, and I think what you were saying about, kind of affirmatively saying to somebody, it's okay for you to like help me transfer, because a lot of people, might not be comfortable with that. And
yes.
And it's probably it's a lot better for someone to ask if that's okay first before they do that. Cause I've seen that happen where they just kind of do it without asking, and that's awkward.
Yes.
Sure.
And sometimes people they just want to help and they think they know how to do it, or maybe they have done it in the past, but for what works for one person is not going to work for every single person.
Absolutely.
So, but I mean, like, bless their heart, they think that they know that they, what they're willing to try. They maybe come over, start grabbing at you, but, just speak up, be like, wait, like, thank you. Like, please, hold off a second, you need to hold me under here, or you need to do this or that, or be sure not to touch me here, or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or, so you just need to just not assume that people, know everything that you need. You really need to be your own advocate is key.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that's a really important thing to think about for everybody involved, I think. So one of the things I remember we talked about a while ago with Dana and Diana, who helped kind of put questions together for this, was getting stuck, sort of literally or metaphorically. And you had, a few stories to tell about that, getting stuck in a situation where like you got partway up a trail or we're traveling. And so tell me a little bit about that. What happens when you get stuck?
Yeah, I've gotten
Because you're
stuck at,
just not you're not shy, and you're gung ho.
yeah, there's a couple times I got stuck. There was one time in Sedona that I was at this overlook and I saw this trail that I could do, but it had been raining, and so there was these huge puddles that I knew were going to be really, really thick and full of like this mud type soots, and that I would definitely get stuck in. So I'm just like, okay, I just need to, if I could somehow get around that, but just the way the topography was, it was basically in like a crater kind of scenario. And I had to just gun it and get tons of speed and ride that rim really fast and hope that that was firm enough not to collapse in order to get to this trail. And I made it about 80% of the way, and then Tara just hit a soft spot and just completely sunk. And it was cold. I think it was like February, so it was winter time, but absolutely beautiful. I was out in the middle of nowhere. It was starting to, snow ever so slightly, just ever so slightly. I knew it was the off season too, so I'm like, oh, and it wasn't. I was in an area that wasn't too terribly popular. I was kind of off the beaten tracks, but I just had to wait. I just had to wait, and so I knew somebody would come along eventually, and I just was a little mad at myself, but there's no point in getting mad at yourself. So I just kind of take a deep breath, do some stretching, take a sip of my water, maybe do some writing. Okay, now it's time to journal. Always have my notebook around with me for deep thoughts about getting stuck. Yeah,
Great.
eventually somebody came, and I saw them and was able to flag them down, and it was two guys, and it definitely took a lot of muscles, because it was this really deep dirt, thick, deep red sand, and like muddy red dirt sand combination, and it took them quite a while to to dig me out and get me out of that hole. But we were like laughing the whole time, and we were just cracking up and cracking jokes, and talking about just trails and adventures and that kind of a thing, and which is part of the whole getting stuck experience, just that connection also, like, with other people.
Right.
I don't mind getting stuck, because I feel like, one, I like to push my boundaries, but also I feel like, two, it's kind of like a win-win. Like, I push my boundaries, see how far I can go, I learn something about the chair or myself otherwise, and then two, somebody else gets to be a hero for the day, and they get to do a really, really good deed, and something that they weren't expecting. Like, it's nobody expects in the places that I go to find some girl in a wheelchair just stuck in the places that I get to sometimes. They'll just be hiking along, and they're just like, what? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I just had to try it. I just had to go for it. And they appreciate it. They, as adventurers, as people who love the outdoors, they get it. They understand that.
Yeah.
And and I feel like it definitely fuels them, to realize, oh yeah, if this is me one day, like, this is totally how I'm going to be. Like, I'm going to be like out mobbing in the wilderness, in my power chair, like flipping around out of my wheelchair, and because it can happen.
Well, absolutely. And I think, that it makes me think that there, different people have different approaches to this. And some people are all about the destination. Some people are about the journey. And, what you're describing is really, it's that journey and that experience that you have, in the process.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, you plan and you plan and you plan. I plan to go to this attraction, for this amount of time, and then, be out of there. But it ended up being, killing a couple hours of my day. So whenever I travel, I just have patience and trust for whatever kind of lays before me. I just go with it. If I get held up, if the train stops, if the train's delayed, if there's a detour, it's like, okay, this is kind of fun. Like, it's almost adventure time. It's almost kind of a little exciting, where it's like, okay, I had this mapped out, like, yeah, what's going to be around the corner this time? What's going to lay ahead in store for me, which is fun.
And that's ideal. I mean, for what you do, that's the kind of attitude you need. You made a comment just then about the folks that, kind of encountered you out there in the middle of nowhere. where they kind of looked at it and went, yeah, I could be in that situation, one of these days. And, I think, one of the things I like to talk to people about is, there are two kinds of people. There's like seniors, and there's seniors in training, if we're lucky. And at some point we'll need to have some kind of accommodation. And you reminded me of a term last time we talked, tabs.
Yes.
So what is tab? What is a tab?
So a tab is a phrase that I learned a few years after I became paralyzed. I can't remember who said it to me, but it's fairly known in the community that a tab is a temporarily abled body. And we joke about that because it's so true, because you just never know what's going to possibly happen to you. And, sooner or later, whether it's just age, you're not going to be able to, go on that 2-mile hike. But if you had a power wheelchair with the right tires, then, you could still be yourself. You can still get lost in nature and, in the smells and the sound, and go bird watching and be the person that you always are.
Absolutely. So, I've got a couple of other questions before we wrap up. One of them is, what about, a lot of people might not be, kind of real confident about getting outdoors and, doing a lot of exploring. Any tips you have for folks that might be a little bit afraid or who don't recreate, on a regular basis?
I would say definitely, do your research. Again, that's one of the reasons why I created WheelchairTravelingcom, just to kind of to start you exposing, with pictures and videos, like what's out there, how are other people doing that. There's message boards, there's community boards, there's support groups of people who have done these things. New Mobility magazine is a resource, that writes about, different activities and, just lifestyle things, recreation, traveler and otherwise. But for people who don't recreate, who don't like, or maybe even like afraid to do it, unfortunately, like, where you need to start is the root of that fear, is, to understand where the root of that fear comes from and face it and become friends with it in order to overcome it. You don't have to necessarily get rid of it, but don't let it control your life. Don't let it hinder you from, what you want to do and become, because it could be a completely irrational fear that's stopping you from doing something that, might be really beneficial or something that you might really, really love. So definitely, just get out of your head and, focus on your heart, your spirit, and like what really brings you joy. Something that I would also like to, suggest as well for people who, they don't really necessarily know where to start. So besides, WheelchairTraveling.com, and support groups, and that kind of a thing. And there's like local chapters that you can get involved with, a lot of online communities and stuff that you can be a part of, and ask questions, of like really, really cool people. Don't be afraid of other people, like in your own disability community, like whatever that is, like we're all super cool people. Like it's such an amazing thing to be a part of. There are Disabled Sports USA is a good organization, and they have, all different kinds of activities and events, around the country, and different things set up so you can get involved with them, seeing what they have opportunities. There's different things like, like sailing, like there's BADS in the Bay Area, the Bay Area Association of Disabled Sailors. And then there's, in San Diego, there's also a sailing company as well. And these companies actually don't charge fees, to do these activities. You just have to schedule in advance because it's all on a volunteer basis. Right. So they just have to be able to, to schedule these things. So there are these kinds of things, to, look into where you're, going tandem maybe with somebody. Is you're not going to be left out on the water, like all alone, so to speak. There's right. also No Barriers, which is a good organization. Like each year they, go to different spots around the country and have a weekend of activities. In Colorado, they have everything from mountain bike, and canyoning, which is, basically ziplining across a canyon, horseback riding, to like tennis and all these different kinds of sports. So it can really allow you just to kind of test your boundaries that way as well. There's also a good organization called CAF, which is the Challenged Athlete Foundation. And it's
Okay.
a phenomenal organization, and they actually can support helping you get funding for recreational chairs or adaptive
nice.
equipment. So if you know, for adaptive fishing, or, you know, a racket for tennis or something like that,
Right.
or a hand cycle. My boyfriend actually got money to buy a hand cycle, which was
Wow.
absolutely fantastic, you know, and those things are not cheap. So, you know, you do have to put a little effort in. You can't just say like, oh yeah, like give me the money. It has to be something that, you know, you really want to use and, you know, are going to take advantage of. You know, these people definitely work really hard to raise the money. So of course, you know, don't take advantage of the system, but like, you know, go for it. Like if there's something that you're really interested in, you know, definitely go for it. There's definitely, you know, so with support groups, there are ways to get involved with your community. Like I said, whether it's online or, you know, like peer-to-peer, or like, you know, through dancing or otherwise, there are things out there. So whatever your interest is, find it, do research, you know, like make the effort.
So let's see. And that kind of segues into one of the last questions we have is, you know, kind of what recreational options do you recommend for folks with limited incomes? And you just mentioned, you know, CAF, which is the Challenged Athletes Foundation. And it's just challengedathletes.org, it looks like.
Yeah.
It looks like a really cool organization, but that's one option.
And then there's in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's an organization that is not just for San Francisco Bay Area. They actually do things around the country, is the Environmental Traveling Companions. It could be plural or it could be singular. I'm not quite sure, but they're a great organization too. But there's others as well out there, you know, that are doing, you know, all these cool like adaptive programs where you can go kayaking, where you can try out these different things, you know, like water skiing and so on. What I think might be really good to still kind of talk about is like while I'm traveling, like what do I do to, you know, like take care of myself, which I think is important. And I think one of the most important things is attitude, for sure. Like attitude is really important. And along with that is perception. How we see something is key. So we can see, oh yes, I go to a city and I want to go to this attraction and there's a million stairs and I'm going to, you know, be really mad about it and, you know, just go back to my hotel and just, you know, take a nap and just, you know, have a hissy fit, so to speak. Or if that particular place, you know, isn't accessible, okay, well, I'm just going to go to the cafe that's like right nearby and maybe have an experience, like have, you know, like smell the coffee that's local and the bread wafting out from the bakery and the person across the street playing music, you know, and like feel the liveliness that's actually there. Like whatever you can experience, experience it. Of course, you know, be your own advocate and speak up. Like I said earlier, don't expect a stranger to know, you know, like what you need. And definitely trust your gut. I mean, you know better than anybody else. So, you know, I'm all for overcoming fear, you know, like, and not letting fear control you or whatnot. But sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm going to call it a night and go home. You know, just trust that gut. Or, you know what? I'm in Ecuador and the zip lining looks a little sketchy, but I'm just going to, you know, trust in God and my angels and just go for it. And, you know, you'll definitely be rewarded for sure.
So what's next? What do you got planned?
What's next? Well, I have ideas. I'm just not sure exactly what's going to be going down in the next like few months, just because with everything happening. But my older sister does live in Georgia, so I still would love to go take a road trip from California all the way out to Georgia. I think that would be really cool. I haven't done that yet. I've been to Georgia, driven all the way up to Ohio, which was really fun. But of course, I mean, like parks are definitely my bread and butter. So there's still plenty of parks for me to go visit here in the United States and around the rest of the world.
I think pre-pandemic, you were in New Zealand and Australia, right?
Yes. New Zealand has been something of a dream of mine even before I started the website. My older sister had gone there and just the way she would talk about the ferns and the lush greenery. Oh, and the pictures that she showed me, I just drooled. Like my heart just exploded. I wanted to go there so bad, but I didn't think that I could after I became paralyzed. Just because how am I going to get around? I'm going to have to rent a car. It's going to be so tiring to do all these things. And the trails, though they're barrier free, they're not necessarily 100% accessible the whole time. And there definitely are challenges with some of the trails and a lot of physical endurance that is required. But I don't know, that the stars just aligned. I'd been trying to go to New Zealand for a couple of years, and it just always fell through. And this year, everything just seemed to click. And New Zealand, in terms of accommodations and bathrooms and that kind of thing, insanely accessible, just so wonderfully accessible, just such great people, and really people who are willing to, be inclusive. I mean, I think that is like the inclusive capital of the world, pretty much.
Wow.
Where they have, some of the basic infrastructure, like bathrooms, accessible, but, some of these activities and whatnot, they're not 100% accessible. So you have to, work with the terrain and work, possibly with other people in order to make things happen. But it is 100% possible. New Zealand was just, it was dying and going to park heaven. So for somebody who loves nature and parks and the outdoors, I mean, that's easily going to be one of my favorite places that I've ever traveled to, ever. And I'm going to be dreaming about that for years to come. It fulfilled every expectation that I had of what I thought it could be.
That's fantastic. I love the pictures you had, on your feed. Looked like a wonderful trip.
Yes, I have a ton of work. I have so many maps I've been working on, putting together, different guides. Haven't started my videos yet, but it takes like a lot of organization at first just to get things organized and going in sections before even really hardcore writing gets involved. I'm pretty much just at the bullet point stage, but it will all be up there. I did finish recently a video for Death Valley National Park, which is absolutely incredible. It wasn't really on my radar for many years. I was kind of curious about it. I would see pictures, but I'd gone to Las Vegas. I had driven through Southern California countless times, and I'm like, where's Death Valley? Like, what else? What could I see that would be so beautiful? Oh, was I wrong? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I was so wrong. And it just goes to show you that national parks are national parks for a reason. There's something truly epic and special about each and every piece of land that has been saved and preserved. And I am so grateful and appreciative to all the people for all the many generations and still today and to come that have continued to serve the parks. Nice. and to make them accessible too. So
absolutely,
us can
amen.
Enjoy them as well, because we do want to get out in nature as well, of course.
Parks are for everyone.
Definitely.
One of the reasons you and I started talking years ago was around the idea of when that access means business for recreation and tourism industries, and by being more inclusive, they expand their audience of clients. What's something that you would say to folks that work in the travel and tourism industry, or at the state level, or some of those industries? What would you like to kind of have them think about?
I would like them to think about how it's not just the individual person who needs the access, it's who they're connected to as well. And that also opens up to the world of, inclusiveness, where, I can throw out all these numbers about, how many people in the United States and around the world who are disabled. But then you think of their family and their friends, and then who they're connected to and who they're connected to. And if we want to go out to eat or whatnot and go somewhere, it has to be accessible. So by not including one person that is, one person who needs accessibility, you're definitely excluding all of their friends and family as well, because we can't all be together and share that. And we will go somewhere, guaranteed somewhere else, and take our business somewhere else where we can be altogether. And sadly, that's still definitely happening in the United States. But there's ways to make things inclusive. For example, in Europe, maybe these small restaurants, they're super teeny tiny. They don't have a ton of seating inside. And if they do, it's super jammed. Where's the majority of their seating? All outdoors.
Right.
So I'm thinking possibly because of, everything that's happened with this virus, that might actually increase the inclusiveness of restaurants and dining al fresco for people. So maybe you can say, yeah, our bathrooms aren't accessible, but yes, no, come dine. You can sit on our patio and whatnot. But oh yes, if you go down to this gas station 2 doors down, or this movie theater or whatnot, they do have an accessible restroom. That's a way of kind of still being inclusive. You can be offering what you're able to do at that moment, and then also still provide them with education. Okay, yes, I can't provide you with an accessible bathroom, but I do know of one, at this restaurant. They said that you can use it. We've already talked to them. You set up an arrangement ahead of time, or, this movie theater, this shopping center or whatnot. It really opens the doors for, like I said, the 6 degrees of separation of human beings, just thinking of it that way, where, somebody's coming into town and visiting, wedding celebration, work events and whatnot. It definitely opens up the doors for all of us. And I want all of us to be seen as not a second thought, not as something, something access that you have to create, but how can we provide the same experience for this person as the next person? How can he or she be included in this dining experience, be just as good as the next person? Let's not cram them in the corner by the bathroom, or push them off to the side. Let's treat them just like everybody else.
Absolutely. And you make a good point. You've got an entourage. It's not just one person that's being excluded when there's a barrier. And that was kind of the thing that kind of got us thinking about Ramp Up Idaho years ago. And I think that's about when I reached out to you, was when we were just forming that. And it was that kind of experience where there were, 8 or 10 of us going out to get a drink, and one of our party was using a powered chair, my friend Brian, and no place was accessible. So we did a team lift and got him, in and out of there.
Oh my goodness.
2 nights in a row. And we dropped some money in that place. And that was, it was like the light bulb went off, and it was like, oh yeah, this is an issue. This is a barrier to commerce. Not just to Brian. So.
And there's so many ways around, accessibility. It doesn't mean, okay, yes, you have this beautiful old building. It doesn't mean, tearing down infrastructure.
Right.
I've been to Japan. I've been to New York. I've seen ancient buildings that will build barriers and ramps over the structure in order not to damage it, but still create access. I don't care necessarily if I have to go around the back or the side, but just let me know how I can access your place of business. Have a sign out, push for assistance, like we have a ramp inside, like whatever it might be. Let us know how we can enter. Because yes, we're social creatures, we go shopping together, we dine together, and it definitely opens up the world and adds more to just the support of humanity, allows us all just to, be more social creatures and, just be out in the world as we want to be.
Well, I love it. Thanks for taking time today. I really appreciate your, being willing to kind of talk through some of this stuff a little bit. We'll definitely have a link to WheelchairTravelingcom, and you've got a ton of information on there. So I really appreciate the work you put into it, and it's real helpful.
Yes, and thank you everybody who listens. Keep traveling, go outside, get fresh air, super important, and where possible, make it accessible.
Access your world.
Access your world.
Okay. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
A word collage in the shape of the United States, with the word access highlighted, and hashtag thanks to the ADA.